All right, now we begin here with our big story. The U.S. and the European Union are outlining a framework agreement on trade. And under this deal, the U.S. would impose a 15% tariff on imports of European pharmaceuticals, as well as alcohol and other products as well. The agreement also calls for the EU to eliminate tariffs on all American industrial exports. In a joint statement, the U.S. and EU said that the agreement will put the trade and investment relationship on solid footing, helping to reinvigorate economic reindustrialization for both sides. Economist Joe Brusella is joining me now for more on that. Actually, I'd love your take there on that statement right there at the very end, to reinvigorate. Is that your analysis of this deal? Is that how you see it? Does the U.S. come out reinvigorated?
Not necessarily. All this is going to result in is everyone's going to pay a lot more for European imports of agriculture, alcohol, and autos, not to mention pharmaceuticals. In many ways, this is a big step back from the free trade era. Yes, American products will face next to zero tariffs, and that's a good thing, right? But in totality, all we're doing is we're going to tax imports, which of course spills over into a tax on exports. And with these sort of loose framework agreements, they're not trade agreements, they're not legally binding, you end up in a never-ending series of renegotiation, and we all tend to be off we're a little worse off than we were before.
We know that a lot of major retailers, including Walmart, right, they have indicated that they will raise prices on certain products. We certainly saw how Walmart was impacted at the closing bell today as well. What's that your indication of the future?
Well, my sense is that from now on, anything you want to buy from outside of the United States, over time, you're likely to see an effective tariff or tax of around 17.5%. So you should prepare to have your purchasing power diminished because of these tariffs. One of the real problems inside the EU-US agreement is that we've lowered tariffs on European auto imports now to below where the US auto producers are going to have to pay. Let me explain that. We got 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. What that means is it's going to be effectively more cost effective to buy a European import than an American domestic product. This is the sort of convoluted logic around the trade agreements that we see across the economy. And my sense is once the American public gets a sense of this, we're going to be back at it negotiating again with our European allies.
Well, then, as you anticipate going back and negotiating it again, who in the interim sort of bears the brunt?
It's going to be American importers, retailers, and most importantly, over a period of a couple of years, American consumers. Period. End of sentence.
Period. End of sentence. American importers and retailers. Joe, listen, we appreciate your assessment. Thank you for being here with us today. I want to bring our big story now to our panel. Joining us today is our ABC News political contributor and former Democratic U.S. Senator for North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp, ABC News contributor and National Review editor Ramesh Ponnuru, ABC News contributor and Sirius XM radio host Mike Muse, and Republican strategist and attorney Mehek Cook. Wonderful to be with all of you. Mehek, I guess let me know what you think of Joe there. What do you agree with his assessment? Do you feel like that this is American consumers and businesses that are going to be feeling the brunt of this in a really negative way?
I really don't. And I think that for once, I would love for the media and people on the left to actually cheer what President Trump is doing. He's resetting trade policy. When you look at a 15% tariff, we're actually reducing it. If you look back at the data, what used to be at 27.5% for imports on autos and parts. So the fact that we're doing an immediate reduction, that cost that was passed to consumers prior to tax rate reductions was actually threatening hikes. So we're reducing tariffs today. We're avoiding 30% on pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. And the other important part of this is that the U.S. is actually collecting tens of billions of dollars annually with that 15% EU import on autos and pharmaceuticals. All those funds are actually going to go directly to the American people, whether it's infrastructure, tax relief, and American priorities. And we know that President Trump has done this because he's already delivering tax relief through the big, beautiful bill and tax reductions to the middle class families. So to continue to say that this is going to fail and we're going to have to come back and negotiate, I just think people need to sit back and realize that this is going to be successful and we have to give it time.
And that giving it time, Heidi, I do think that that is something that we have heard from the Trump administration, though, a few times. And it's an ask of the American people to sort of, can you ride this out? Can you give me enough time? Are the American people willing to do that?
It just depends on what their pocketbook says after the next quarter. You already see in the index of consumer sentiment, people are souring on these economic policies because it's not lowering prices for them, which the president promised he would do. But, you know, I think one thing that isn't getting talked about, which is the legality of these. There's a case pending in the D.C. Circuit Court. We'll see whether they say these tariffs are legitimate. It appears that the president is using something called 232 tariff authority. But traditionally, if you do a trade agreement, you have to take it to Congress and have it approved. And so when your previous pundit basically talked about renegotiation, once again, there's no certainty in this, because once again, when the court would make a decision or when somebody would challenge this, you're going to see this up and down. And so, you know, this isn't permanent policy. And by the way, when you say, oh, look at all the revenue we're generating, that's revenue generated from American consumers and American businesses. This is not being paid for by foreign countries, as we were promised.
No, that's actually the Europeans paying us 15%. That's revenue we're actually collecting from Europe. So I just have to correct you there.
Well, that we'll see. We'll see how that works when the final agreement's done. And that's the other thing. We keep getting these. This is not a penned agreement. This is an outline of what that agreement will look like. It clearly could fall apart once you start penning out the details. So this idea that this isn't going to raise prices for American consumers, as your previous speaker talked about, is again a pipe dream. Now, if you want to tax tariffs, if you want to tax imports, fine. You're going to raise revenue, but somebody's going to pay that, and somebody who's going to pay it is American consumers and businesses.
It is a framework of a deal at this point, Ramesh. We know that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is really touting it as a major win for American workers. To Mehek's point, he also feels like it's a major win for U.S. industries and national security as well. Do you agree?
Well, I think that the plus side of the agreement, for which the president deserves some credit, is the reduction on European tariffs on American exports to Europe. The minus side is the illegal taxes on Americans who consume European products, and that includes U.S. companies who import important inputs and intermediate and capital goods from European companies. That's going to shrink those manufacturing companies. It's going to make them reduce their employment, going to make them hike their prices. You can think all you want of what a great man this president is. He cannot repeal the laws of economics.
And so, Mike, as you're analyzing everybody else's, what they're saying here, what are you watching for the closest, and what do you have your eye on?
Choice. And I'm thinking about taxing of choice. It's kind of what Ramesh was talking about. Sometimes the weight and scale of economics is the weight and scale of economics. There's a couple things at play. I think your guest really tapped on really early about the car manufacturers and industries with a different type of steel and aluminum. There's so many different types of parts that goes into manufacturing cars because there are subjective tariffs on different parts that consume a car. How then would that offset the new tariffs that will be associated with the American-made cars? What I mean by taxing of the choice, though, is that there are a lot of American consumers who do enjoy European manufactured cars, from Mercedes-Benz to BMWs and to Audis. And once you are that type of consumer, you typically generally keep that type of car in your portfolio. And so you typically don't opt for U.S.-made cars. And so what happens to that American consumer when they go to make a new purchase, that they'll be taxed more higher because of the tariffs that will be associated with that. When you mentioned national security, I find that interesting, Kana. I still haven't yet to really figure out how this administration is approaching AI and semiconductor chips. I know that Trump and his Trump administration is very pro-tech and pro-digital currency, but when we continuously to ship more semiconductors and NVIDIA to Europe, what we're doing is we're allowing them more access to these chips to scale and to manufacture more AI products that could be much more competitive in the marketplace than U.S. innovation because the EU has already set of established AI principles supposed rules. They're way ahead of us when it comes to data privacy dynamics and tactics. And so the question remains to me when it comes to national security, how are we playing that? I haven't quite figured that part out yet. And then when it comes to generic drugs and pharmaceuticals, a lot of Americans prefer named and brand name pharmaceutical drugs versus generic. And so for those American consumers who prefer that, how would then they be taxed? So again, it goes to taxing of choice, questioning where we are with national security when it comes to these chips, and then also too when it comes to cars that Americans are interested in.
All right, so we'll watch all of this play out day by day. Heidi, Ramesh, Mike, and Mahek.